Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's show. My name is Brandy Colander, and I'm a principal with the Raven Group, a public affairs and strategic communications firm headquartered in Washington, D.C. As an Obama administration alumni, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce our guest today, Valerie Jarrett. Valerie Jarrett was the longest serving senior advisor to President Barack Obama. She oversaw the offices of public engagement and intergovernmental affairs and chaired the White House Council on Women and Girls. Prior to joining the White House, she held numerous leadership positions and is currently a senior advisor to the Obama Foundation and ATTN, as well as on several boards, some of which I hope we'll have an opportunity to explore in our conversation today. I want to thank you all for joining us, and please be sure to join the conversation by submitting comments. Ms. Jarrett, thank you.
Hello there, Brandy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are
Good.
you?
It's good to
Good.
see you, even if
It is.
only virtually.
I know. So let's start there, actually. How are you managing during the pandemic? Are you and yours well? Favorite television shows?
Well, thank you for asking. Yeah, we are well, and I think it's challenging to be in New York since it's the epicenter, but obviously, as this pandemic virus spreads across the country, it's affecting many families who we know and hold dear. So we just have to stay strong, stay vigilant. I am self-quarantining with the exception of seeing my daughter, son-in-law, and grandson, and that's the light of my life. And I take long walks with my best friend from law school from 40 years ago, and I've really kind of gotten reacquainted seeing her all day long every day. We take long walks all over the city. So I'm fine. And I've been watching all kinds of things on television, catching up with old shows and new shows, and reading a lot. So it's all things considered, I've been one of the lucky ones.
That's fantastic. I do want to just take a moment to have you tell us a little bit about what life as a grandmother is like.
Oh, divine. Divine. And I know we're going to talk a bit about my paperback book. I added 2 new chapters from the hardback that came out last year to this year. And the last one is really all about seeing the world through the lens of a grandparent. And frankly, particularly a grandparent of a Black and brown grandson. And I only had one daughter, and I know my grandson is going to face challenges that she didn't face. And I worry about the climate in which he's coming into, and I'm just hopeful that that changes before he's cognizant of kind of the chaos in which we're living right now.
Yeah. Let's delve into the book. The genesis of the book came from a question that your daughter Laura asked you during a StoryCorps conversation that you two recorded. I would love for you to sort of, now that you've had some time to step back and time to add 2 additional chapters, talk to us about whether or not you found the process to be cathartic, laborious. What are your reflections on writing the book?
Both. It was very hard to get started. I think it's kind of like if you were to write your own eulogy. You know, what parts of your life do you really want to highlight? And my goal was a couple things. I've learned a lot along my circuitous path, and so sharing my story in the hopes that people could see a bit of themselves through my experiences, do no harm, and tell the truth. And so the cathartic part is that I really spent my entire life professionally and personally looking forward. And maybe it's because I've just been so darn busy. I never really have had a chance to reflect and think back. And I mean, I wasn't one of those people who ever went to college reunions or high school reunions or anything. My friends who were my friends stuck, and then the rest of it I kind of just left behind. And the book was really a chance for me to take a deep breath. I turned 60. I still gulp when I say that. The week after the 2016 presidential election, and I thought, well, 60 and the end of this administration is probably an important time to start to reflect. And when Laura asked me the question, you know, what would you tell a 30-year-old Valerie Jarrett? That's what began this journey. And I begin the book really when I'm about 31, 10 years after I made this great 10-year plan that collapsed. And I thought, well, let me talk about what that was like to be a young single mom working at a big law firm, and the challenges that I faced, and then the opportunities and the risks that I took, and the adventure and the the paperback's title, I changed the subtitle. I kept finding my voice, and I changed the subtitle to "When the Perfect Plan Crumbles, the Adventure Begins." And that's been like a part of my life. I kept making, these perfect plans, and then opportunity would knock and take me in a different direction. And so it was definitely cathartic. I put some stuff in order in my own mind and in my own heart. And what I enjoyed far more than the process of writing the book was touring on the book tour around the country, as I did most of the last year, and just hearing other people's stories. Because I think when you open up, Brandy, and you tell your truth, and some of it's painful and stressful, and times in my life where I think I made big mistakes that ended up actually turning out okay. And when you do that, then other people open up and tell you their stories. And so I heard some incredible stories along the way.
It gives them permission. No, I appreciate that.
It gives permission, exactly.
One of the things, Valerie, that I still really value today is that you were very intentional about carving out spaces for different demographics in the Obama administration. And not just because I was a direct recipient of that, but also because it was by far the most diverse administration in our nation's history. So I wanted to see if we could spend a little bit of time talking about something that you talked a lot about in gender equality throughout the course of the book, and you being really intentional about carving out spaces for senior White House women to be able to have access to the president. Tell us about how you navigated that and why that was so important to you.
Well, why was it important? I think because earlier in my career, I worked in the private sector at a law firm in a very male-dominated environment where I felt that if I brought my whole self to the office, that people wouldn't take me as seriously. So I was about, for example, 8 months pregnant before I told anybody I was pregnant. Now, I gained about 90 pounds. I mean, I was a big girl. So it wasn't like I could hide it, really. But I just thought, well, let me not talk about this. And then once I had my daughter, I never really brought her up. And I didn't have any women mentors to kind of tell me how to navigate being a working mom. And I also, even after when I left the law firm, I took this huge leap of faith to join local government. I still was working really long hours. And I kept thinking, oh my gosh, Brandy, well, if I were just smarter or better organized or slept fewer hours, maybe this wouldn't be so hard. And I always felt like I was holding on by my fingertips. And so 30 years ago is really when I started thinking about, well, what about those working moms that don't have a great job and health insurance and parents who are supportive and wonderful daycare, childcare, and flexibility? And what if they have none of the stuff I have, this huge safety net that I had? How are they going to make it? And what do we owe them to make life easier for them? So I spent a lot of time focusing on gender equity from the perspective of a nice thing and the right thing to do. And I think one of the ways I've evolved is to recognize now, as so many people are, it's actually an imperative if you want to be competitive, if you want to make the best possible decisions. And President Obama got that. And so from the very beginning, as co-chair of his transition, he said, I believe diversity is a strength and that we have to be inclusive. And look at his life. He was raised by a single mom as well, grandmother who always worked, this dynamic, extraordinarily talented wife and 2 daughters. So you kind of had him with hello. But what we learned in the White House is that you can't wish a culture. You have to actually make the culture. And because I had been through the experience where I didn't have a mentor and I wasn't feeling nurtured and I never wanted to kind of speak up for myself, I didn't feel validated in the private sector. When I went to local government, I had an incredible mentor. It was an African-American woman who was a mom herself. Her daughter was 16 when my daughter was 2, so she'd kind of been through it. And she got me to open up and kind of bring my whole self to the office. She invested in me. She became my mentor and my friend and changed my life, just like in so many ways. Like, we don't even have time to talk about all the ways. Read my book. A lot of them are in the book of how she affected me. And I swore that if I was ever in the position to do the same, that I would do it because it made such a difference for me. And So in the White House in the beginning, I think some of the women were feeling that their voices weren't being heard and getting drowned out by a lot of noise. And look, we came into the worst economic crisis other than the one we're currently in,
Correct. Yeah.
and trying to get healthcare passed and focusing on clean energy. And we had 2 wars, we had a lot going on. And temperamentally, I think that sometimes women, if it's noisy, then they tend to pull back a little bit. And when I mentioned it to President Obama, he's like, well, I need their voices. They're here for a reason. And so he invited all the women over for dinner. And I remember it was the night of the Fort Hood massacre. And so a few of the women were like, oh, I don't even know if he's going to show up. He'd been in the Situation Room all day. And I said, I bet he'll be here because this is important to him. And what I remember most about the dinner, other than the women opening up, and I had said to them ahead of time, you have to explain to him what the challenge is. Because if you do what I know you are tempted to do, which is to say, oh, Mr. President, everything's fine, then we're not going to be able to really get to the root of this issue. And so they were very open. And what he said is, look, you're not fighting for yourself, you're fighting for your ideas. And you're here because I value those ideas. I'll make better decisions with the benefit of your impact. So get in there and fight for your ideas. And it was so empowering to have him say that. And it was like the beginning of building a culture where inclusion, not just saying diversity is important, but how are we inclusive? How are we very intentional about that inclusivity? And I'm really proud that at the end of the first term, he told somebody, in the beginning, I had the best players on the field. And by the end of the first term, I had the best team. And part of that teamwork comes from trust and seeing how you react under pressure and people feeling that they had folks rooting for them. And I think the women, we started having our own dinners without him after that. And the reason why I encourage this, Brandy, is because when you go out and you break bread with somebody, you don't just talk about work, you talk about what's important to you, your children, your family, what books you read, what movies you're seeing, all that kind of stuff that we all do with our friends. And it's the beginning of a different kind of a relationship, a more whole relationship than just a work relationship. And so when you go into a meeting and there's somebody in the meeting who you just had dinner with the night before, it gives you a little extra courage to speak up.
Absolutely.
And so I always say, make time for building those personal relationships. And if you are in the position of authority, you have to recognize that just because you want a certain kind of culture, people bring their past experience to the table until you build that culture. And I would say that President Obama was very intentional about building that culture.
That's really helpful. Thank you for that. You mentioned something that I would love to explore a bit more, which is about temperament. And I think you were really thoughtful about creating that space for different demographics, but also one of the things that really I've noticed in the previous administration and of course the current is the conversations around leadership and temperament. And Valerie, you spent a lot of time in your book talking about how you were sort of naturally a shy person and have honed the skills of leadership over time. And President Obama was often criticized, and former Attorney General Eric Holder was often criticized for sort of suppressing rage. Talk to us a little bit about temperament and what makes an effective and tactful leader.
Such a good question. Yeah, I remember, you all will too, that at the first joint address before Congress that President Obama made talking about the Affordable Care Act, that one of the congressmen yelled out, Joe Wilson yelled out, "You lie." And a lot of people called me afterwards, particularly Black people, and they were like, why didn't he stop and say something? Why didn't he respond? And the reason why he didn't is that he was delivering in front of the most important, largest audience he could capture why he was working so hard to get the Affordable Care Act passed and why it was important to the lives of the American people. And if he did anything to distract from that, then it was in service of himself and not the purpose of him being there. And one of the ways I describe this in my book is that we all have to learn to absorb a certain amount of pain. And that's the price for the privilege of service. And you have to go into it recognizing what motivates you to do this in the first place. Is it about you, or is it about your self-aggrandizement? Is it about the number of followers you have? No, it's about what you're going to do for the American people. And and it does, I'm not just talking about the President of the United States, it's in any position of leadership, tone matters. And we were very proud of being the no drama Obama administration. And that's not to say there wasn't ever any drama. Of course there was, but he set a tone of focus, and he didn't have time for a lot of nonsense, and encouraged people to treat each other with respect, bring their full selves to the table, be transparent and honest in the decision-making process so that people would know how the decisions got made, so that even if they disagreed, they felt that there was a rigorous process that was inclusive so that their voices could be heard. And I think that that's a better way of serving the American people. If you're off on a rant about something that's happened to you and your temperament is volatile, it's destabilizing. And look, you're the role model. You're the one that people are looking up to. And, so, and now, is it hard? Sure. Were there probably many occasions where he had something he would have liked to have said and he had to just like swallow it? We all had that. Goodness knows I experienced it. And so where becoming a parent is quite helpful. You learn to take a deep breath, lower your voice, and just check yourself. And I think that strong leaders are able to take their own kind of emotions and suppress them for the greater good. And that's just one of the many characteristics I think that leadership, good leadership, requires.
And it's interesting because I think right now you touched on a few things, Valerie, around the media in terms of sort of making sure that the headline is the substance versus the emotional reaction. Let's talk about the role of the media since the last administration. It was absolutely critical from a campaign perspective. Social media leveraged in a way never before to get a president elected. What do you think the role of the media is now, looking forward towards November?
Well, look, first of all, we owe a lot of gratitude to those who are in the media. I say that to people who are public servants, but in a sense, the media is providing a very important check and balance as well. And the job is really hard right now. And this kind of toxic climate, you run the risk of coming under personal attack, getting death threats to the extreme. But the media's job is to tell the facts, to tell the truth, to get the story out. And what has changed over the course of the last couple of decades, not even, is when you look, when I was growing up, whatever Walter Cronkite said, that was gospel, right? Mm-hmm. He had all day to get it right. He didn't blur the lines between news and editorial and entertainment, except one time when he talked about the Vietnam War. One time he editorialized, and people were really surprised because he never did that. Now, and also, the news was like a lost leader. Nobody was making any money off of the news. Now you make a lot of money off of it, and it becomes tempting to be entertaining. And I think, frankly, that's what happened in the last presidential race. A lot of the coverage was there for entertainment value, and I think the wake-up call was the result of the election. And then you overlay on that the fact that so much of our media now is on demand. So you, Brandy, get to decide who you follow. You know, are you watching Fox? Or you're watching MSNBC, and oftentimes people choose. They don't look at both, and it's so easy and tempting to slide into your comfort zone and only get news that's going to reinforce what you already think, as opposed to challenge you and inform you with the facts. And I'm worried that in this environment, with the media having been so under attack and maligned, that it impacts how you get the message out, how you get the truth out, and could certainly affect not just the presidential election, but many of the down ballot races as well. It's just so easy to micro-target messages that are untrue. And, you know, the more you say them, the more likely it is that people begin to believe them. And in this conspiracy theory-laden world that we're in, unfortunately, what is most salacious, what is most entertaining, what is most shocking, that in the world that I grew up in, we would have said, well, that's ridiculous. People going, oh, yeah, no, that sounds right to me, because it's reinforcing what they already think. So it's a huge challenge, and I think it's going to be up to the field of candidates who are running to figure out how to get their truth out in a way that's honest, with integrity and discipline for being forthcoming and truthful and transparent at a time where the lens is often filtered in a way that's not that. But
yeah.
part of our job as citizens is to fact check the media too. So if we see things in the media that we know are not truthful, then we have to call them out. And I think we also have to get away, Brandy, from this, this is one opinion here, here's another opinion there, fight it out. No, sometimes one is right and one is just wrong, right, on the facts. And I think the media has to call that out too.
No, I think that's really important, Valerie. My brother very astutely often says that social media is a good platform for exchanging energy. And the news ought to be a place for exchanging the facts, right? And so science and the media have absolutely been under attack. I want to address the pandemic, but using the previous administration as a point of opportunity for us to learn. So H1N1 and Ebola were two epidemics that the Obama administration had at our doorstep and we addressed. How did the administration and how did you, through your leadership, Valerie, help to prevent them from becoming global pandemics? What can we learn in terms of leadership and the role of leadership?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's take Ebola, because perhaps it was the most terrifying because the symptoms were so horrendous. H1N1 was serious as well, and we had casualties, but my goodness, if we'd had Ebola on our shores, that would have been truly devastating. And I think part of what we learned is how important it is to coordinate with the business community. One of my responsibilities was to be a liaison to the business community. And I remember when H1N1 first broke out, we called the Chamber of Commerce, not an organization that was necessarily that friendly to the Obama administration, but they came over and we said, look, here are the facts, and this is the information we need to get out to the business community broadly, speaking with one voice. It's also important to coordinate with state and local government. One of my responsibilities was overseeing the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, and those are all the state and local elected officials outside of Congress. And we've seen with this current pandemic the important role that governors and mayors are having, and where there has been tension between the two, and where there has been tension between those elected officials and Washington. And our goal was to make sure we coordinated seamlessly with those state and local elected officials, and that we were a resource to them. Look, the buying power of the federal government is so much better than the buying power of each individual component. And we wanted to make sure that you didn't have price gouging by competition amongst folks who didn't need the resources when there were others that did. The other important thing that we did with Ebola is that President Obama not only galvanized an all-of-government approach in the White House, led by Ron Klain, who had previously been Vice President Biden's chief of staff, who was really the point person making sure that every single day the president and White House staff was briefed on the facts and the evidence of what was happening in Africa. But President Obama also galvanized world leaders around the world to help in our effort to contain Ebola so that it didn't reach our shores. Our military was so actively engaged in that effort. And that's an example of how you do need an all-of-government approach. And we did it from the very beginning. And we learned a lot from those two. We also learned a lot from Zika that did not eventually, it was in Puerto Rico, but it didn't come to the mainland of the country. Containing that and keeping it from coming in. And again, I can't tell you how many meetings I participated in the Situation Room where all of these different federal agencies were involved to say, well, what do we need to do to make sure that we contain this? And out of that came best practices. And so we prepared a report. Well, we did a few things. Number one, we set up an office in the National Security Council focusing on how to approach these global pandemics and funded that. We also funded offices around the world to have early alerts in the case pandemics broke out, so that we would be on the ground in those countries, able to figure out what was going on, not from hearing it all the way from afar, but right there embedded in those countries. Staffed up the CDC, added funding to the CDC, and prepared a 69-page report during the transition so that the new administration could hit the ground running with the benefit of our 8 years of experience. And finally, a tabletop exercise so that the new administration could actually walk through what would you do in the event of a pandemic. And let's face it, back in 2014, President Obama gave a speech and he said, it is very likely within 5 years, we will have a pandemic, a global pandemic. And this is what we have to do to address it. None of which happened.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I have to say, just as a personal point of privilege, with both of my parents are COVID survivors. Both of them are sort of the statistical demographics, and we are extraordinarily fortunate that both of them are still with us, even after my father was in the hospital for over a month. So what you're talking about, Valerie, is obviously deeply personal to me. But the fact that part of the task of the previous administration, and this has been the case over the course of time, is to help stand up, politics and partisanship aside, the next administration. The dismantling of the resources to help put us in a better position to actually beat this with science is literally killing people. And so I appreciate you breaking that down for folks today. And I sincerely hope that moving forward, we'll continue to have good examples of at least local leadership to move us forward.
Thank you, Brandy, for giving me a chance. Because again, I was just reading on Twitter yesterday, and I try to not give into the temptation to respond. But when I saw that the majority leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, was saying, oh, well, why didn't President Obama do anything to help President Trump prepare for this? Well, what about that 69-page report? What about our office in the White House? What about all of our efforts? And so we can't let people distort what we did and try to somehow blame this pandemic on President Obama, because even if we had done a lot wrong, there's been 3 years to get ready for this, and plenty of people warning that this was inevitable. And so, you can't really run away from the responsibility on this. And one of the other lessons about leadership, Brandy, is early information is important.
Yeah.
Wishful thinking doesn't make it so. Happy talk doesn't make it so. Diversion doesn't make it so. The facts are kind of what they are. And you can't make up happy drugs that haven't been tested. All of this kind of looking for the quick fix. And the thing is that one thing I know about the American people, we are resilient, we have grit, we have tenacity. Tell us the truth and we will adjust. But I feel like a lot of us are kind of on an emotional roller coaster, because from one day to the next, we don't know what to believe. And fortunately, I'm in a state with a governor who's acting really responsibly and a mayor who's acting really responsibly, New York. And so, those are the briefings I watch every day, because I know what Governor Cuomo says is going to be accurate.
Correct. There was another crisis that many people don't realize you were really instrumental in helping to navigate for the country. And it's personal to me because I spent time at the White House Council on Environmental Quality and Department of the Interior, but the BP oil crisis. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunity to, again, fortify local leadership there, and then your thoughts on climate change?
Yeah, that's actually a really good example of our approach. So everybody remembers watching that oil just spewing into the Gulf. And the first day, I literally remember when I saw on television the explosion, and thinking first of the people who were on it and the casualties that inevitably happened, and then it didn't really occur to me the damage it did on the ocean floor. But then there it was. And maybe by day 2, President Obama called me down to the Oval Office and he said, I would like for you to have a phone call every morning with the 5 governors in the states that are impacted. Because I want them to know that you're going to come in and tell me whatever they say, so that we can respond immediately to what their needs are. And so I thought, okay, well, that's fine. All 5 Republican governors, all 5 have varying degrees of hesitancy about engaging in this daily call, but they all did it. And I thought, well, look, how long could it last? A week or so at the most, right? 7 days a week, every day for 3 months. That's how long that oil continued to spew. And what I hope they felt is that we were there for them. We were there to support them. We were there to make sure they had the resources that they needed. And there was competition over things like Boom. Many of you don't even know what Boom is, but it is a device that you put on top of the water to corral oil. And everybody wanted plenty of Boom. And so we at the federal government were responsible for allocating the Boom according to need. And I remember, Governor Jindal in Louisiana, he had more Boom than, say, Governor Barber or Governor whoever all of the other governors. And so it was like, well, why is he getting more Boom? Why? Because he has more oil. And we were there to be transparent and explain how we were responding to their needs on the ground. And we wanted to make sure we heard directly from them so that we could meet those needs. Were the small business loans getting to the people who needed them most out of our FEMA department? And it was a good experience in the end. And I developed relationships with all 5 of them. And what I hope that they felt is that partisanship and politics did not enter into it. And in fact, I give one example, which is relevant today, I think, by analogy. Janet Napolitano, who was Homeland Security Secretary, was meeting with Governor Jindal in Louisiana. And I was on the phone call with them. And they were together planning to have a press conference together right after our daily phone call. Governor Jindal raised a question. They wanted something from us. And I said, Governor, we're right on it. Well, I'll get right back to you. They left that phone call and went and had the press conference, and Governor Jindal blasted us for not having responded to him quickly enough. Well, it had been maybe 35 seconds since he'd made the request. The next morning, I was on the phone. Governor Jindal, what can we do for you? There's no time for, petty grievances because you don't like the way somebody responds. Because again, it's not about us. It was about the people of Louisiana who he was there to represent. And I think that mindset is really important. And over time, when you treat people like that, they tend to be responsive. So respect and humanity and empathy, those are all also really important qualities of leaders.
And I mean, it's we have the quote here from the book, but it really is about sort of the true north and the core tenets of how you have chosen to lead. I would love to touch on sort of 2, I think, monumental successes for the administration that are controversial, but I think climate change and healthcare. Climate change in the context of a country that has sort of rejected science, quite candidly, and then healthcare in the midst of a pandemic where people need it most. And politically, it seems as though unemployment is the preferred option where they are not going to be able to exercise that incredibly important resource. What are your thoughts on those 2 issues broadly?
Well, let's take climate change first. So we were very proud to have really galvanized nearly 200 countries around the world to sign on to the Paris Climate Accord, recognizing that the science tells us that climate change is real, and that 2, there cannot be a one-off approach. The United States alone can't solve this problem. We need to have a global approach to it. And we were successful in galvanizing that. And we worked within our own country with the governors and the mayors and the business community to all say, well, what are they going to do to commit? And then we used that example then to go to the rest of the world and say, and what are you going to commit? It is horrifying that the United States has pulled out of that deal. I'm heartened, though, by the fact that many of our governors have said, well, we're still in. Many of our business leaders have said, well, we're still in. But it would be important to have the United States' leadership at the table for something that the world recognizes as a huge challenge. So, and every day counts, and it's so frustrating to see us give up that moral authority, give up that leader of the free world reputation that we have always had and earned. On the Affordable Care Act, certainly one of our proudest achievements. And I think that this pandemic, Brandy, is laying bare the disparities in health that we have had for generations in our country. And in the Affordable Care Act, that didn't get talked about a lot, we put in funding to study those health disparities, to try to close the disparity gap that we know is predominantly in poor communities and communities of color. And as we are seeing, the impact of this pandemic is disproportionately, again, on those very communities. And so we would have wished that those funds had been continually appropriated. So we would, because the first step is understanding the disparities, and then the second step is trying to address them. I'm also troubled that a number of states, I think it's 14, still have not expanded the Medicaid expansion, which would have provided a safety net for another whole layer of people who are vulnerable. And we see what happens if you can't go in and get treatment, and if it's not affordable, what do? And in this case, many people are dying because they cannot afford to go in and get the treatment that they deserve in the richest country in the world. Come on now. Why can't we do that? And making sure that we have resources available for preventive care. So, for example, women's health care was an important part of the Affordable Care Act to me, understanding how important it is for women who tend to put ourselves last. And if it's a choice between books for our children or food on the table or rent, do we go in for that annual checkup? No, of course we don't. As a result of the Affordable Care Act, women can do that without a copay, including birth control. And we know that an important factor in our upward mobility is our ability to choose when we have children. So I think, in a sense, the Affordable Care Act has done a tremendous amount for our country in light of this pandemic, but the people falling through the cracks are the ones that we still have to address. Yeah. And it's just, and the disparity, I mean, people in the White House are being tested every day. People in New York can't get a test even if they have symptoms unless they have a fever. And even then, where do you go? So we're seeing these disparities all over. And I think as we recover, and I know we will recover, I believe it's important to have the kind of leader who is interested in making sure that we don't just go back to where we were, but that we actually close some of those disparities, those gaps, those inequities, those injustices that are in our current healthcare system.
So let's spend a few minutes there and focusing on our pivot to November. And then I know we have a few audience questions. In Finding My Voice, you speak a bit about sort of the essence of the presidency, and we've talked a lot about leadership today and lessons learned and lessons that hopefully could be applied. There are a lot of concerns that are constantly being ginned up when we think about what's going to happen in November. We're trying to figure out whether or not we're still going to be in our homes. I would love to do sort of like a lightning round, if you will, on your thoughts. I would love to first start with the initiative When We All Vote.
Thank you. So a couple years ago, after the last presidential election, Michelle Obama, our former First Lady, and I were chatting about what has become clear of an apathy towards voting in our country. Something like 100 million eligible voters did not vote in the last election, 43% of the country in the last presidential election. And so we had to say to ourselves, well, what's going on here with our culture that people are not stepping up to their most fundamental responsibility of citizenship? I would argue you owe our country a lot more than just voting, but you certainly owe us voting. Particularly people of color, as a Black person, knowing our history and how people fought for us to have the right to vote, we got to be voting. And we decided, quite by design, to organize When We All Vote as a nonpartisan effort to meet people where they are, and focusing a lot on young people, because evidence shows that if you vote in your first election, the likelihood of you becoming a lifelong voter goes up. And so, and also young people disproportionately don't vote. So it's a nice sweet spot to go after, to try to engage young people and to meet them where they are by having influencers who they respect go out and deliver the message. And so we're asking a whole group of co-chairs to, form a voting squad, go out to their networks, and really have a conversation about what kind of a country do we want this to be? Do we want one where the citizens, their priorities, their values matter, or do we want one where the special interests just kind of take over and run roughshod? And politicians are free to ignore us because we're not holding them accountable.
That's right.
And it's also important that this not be perceived as being about one election or one candidate. Our argument is that it matters who is your local mayor, who's on your city council, who are the prosecutors making decisions about who to prosecute in your community, who's in the state legislature drawing redistricting line and appropriating dollars and important resources that go to you, and certainly who's in both the executive and the legislative branches of the federal government, those important checks and balances, to make sure that they're doing their job to work with the local governments and represent us. Don't forget about us.
That's right.
And so we started it 2 years ago. We ramped up during the midterm elections. We've been engaged in all the efforts to help turn out the vote, get people educated, and doing it in this nonpartisan way in the hopes that people will feel less polarized and more like we are in this together. And when we all vote, our country is better. It's stronger. It's more reflective of the values of and the will of the people.
It is indeed.
So, and then we've been trying to make it fun in light of this current climate where we had a big rally with Michelle Obama planned for Detroit back in March. Obviously that was canceled. And so now we're doing things like she drops into GJ D Nice's couch party where he's spinning records on I guess they're not called records anymore, making music regularly. And before he starts with the music, we go in and talk about volunteering for When We All Vote, getting people involved. And again, finding fun ways of meeting people where they are. So that's something I care passionately about, not just this year and next year, but a lifetime. Just it will make our country so much better if everybody is engaged in voting.
Thank you for that. And we have the website below. I also want to
Thank
get
you
on mail-in voting and the state of the post office.
Yes. All right. So that's those are good questions. So I think everybody saw those horrendous lines in Wisconsin for their primary, where people were having to choose between exercising that important right to vote and their health. And we know now that there were several people who stood in that line who came down with the COVID-19. So they were literally putting their lives on the line to vote. And so we are asking for 3 policy changes. One, we would like every state to authorize vote by mail and make it easy for people to vote by mail. And the federal government needs to appropriate funds so that the post office isn't inundated, so that they can, at this time when they are stressed and overworked, accommodate an influx of mail coming in to vote by mail. Mm-hmm. Number 2, we think everybody should be able to register online. Yes. With technology being what it is, that's one less barrier to people participating in the democratic process if they don't have to go down and wait in line and register to vote. And then the final push that we're making, Brandy, is to say, why don't we expand early vote in as many states as possible? We were always big proponents of early vote because, look, there are a lot of workers who can't take off work on a Tuesday and go down and vote. They just can't take off the time, or the people who you have a sick child that day, or an important business meeting, or you just sleep in and forget. And so making it easy for people to vote early in this climate would be additionally helpful, because if more people are not voting on election day, more people are voting by mail, then fewer people are going to have to resort to showing up on election day. And if we are still having social distancing, and we should plan for the worst and hope for the best. So let's plan for the fact that we're not going to be able to stand cheek and jowl the way we historically do during voting. Yeah. And let's make decisions today that prepare us for that in the fall. Absolutely. And, I don't understand why Congress isn't focusing on this, other than I do think there has been a strategy by the Republicans, to suppress the vote from just the people who we're trying to say, empower them so that they can be a part of our democracy too.
Thank you for those thoughts. I do want to probe a bit with you. Throughout the book, you talked a bit about your own political aspirations. You explored a mayoral run. You eyed a Senate seat. Tell us a little bit about whether or not there's a future for you in politics beyond what you've already done.
Yeah, so the way I look at it is this. I was always drawn to service. And that's what really made me walk away from a practice at a big law firm and take a cut in pay and go into a cubicle with a window facing an alley, is a sense of feeling like you're giving back. And I found it very noble. I found it very extraordinarily rewarding at the local level. And it's where I learned to listen, to recognize that people aren't going to trust me just because I think they should. You have to go out there and earn their trust. You have to listen to what their hopes and dreams and aspirations are, so that the policies of government support that. We're in a supporting role. And after having done that for 8 years full-time and then another 8 years part-time, I thought, well, maybe I should think about running myself. And I'd never had political aspirations, but it was kind of just a fleeting thought. And then when President Obama was elected, I had another fleeting thought. Maybe it'd be nice to put my name in the hat to replace him in the Senate. And I will say I got a lot of pressure from many of my friends and family who said, you should go out and you should do it, as opposed to being in the supporting role. And President Obama was quite persuasive about joining the White House. And he said, look, I've been in the Senate. And I know what that's like, and I know what I want to create here, and I know the skill set that you bring. So I want you here. And so who says no to that? Um, at this stage of my life, I say no. And I say no because I know what it takes to be a public servant. I know that it is 24/7, as it should be. I know it has to be your first priority. And I know that I am really enjoying being a grandmother right now. And I was so lucky to have two parents who put the needs of my daughter like front and center at the phase of their life when I was a young single mom. And even though my daughter has an incredibly supportive husband, I want her son to grow up and know that his grandmother puts him first. And you can't do that when you're involved in politics. And then the other thing I would say is what I really enjoy right now is being helpful to other people. I learned a lot in the course of all those years in the public sector and the years I spent in business. And so if I can help young people who want to run for office or old people who want to run for office in any way possible, then I'm really interested in giving them my best advice from what I've learned over the years. And that I find very fulfilling and not nearly as time consuming as putting your hat in the arena yourself.
Okay. Okay. Well, then I will accept that as a no for a VP.
That's a no. That's a no.
Thank you, Valerie. I want to pivot to a few questions that we've received from the audience.
Great.
So let's talk a little bit about, here we go here, many women who are in corporate America who feel overwhelmed with mentorship requests. How would you suggest approaching them? And I also just want to add to this, you know, we hear a lot about sponsors versus mentors. What's a good takeaway?
This is and I have very strong feelings about this. The best way to find a mentor is to work hard and to open yours and always ask for more and to open yourself up to the people who you want to invest in you. I do a lot of public speaking now, and there have been occasions where incredible, dynamic young women have come up to me after the event and they've said, "Will you be my mentor?" And I go, "No, go find somebody who actually knows you." The best mentors are not professional relationships, they're personal, because you want somebody to not just pull you aside and give you advice. You want them to sponsor you and be your promoter. And people won't do that for you unless they care about you. And so the most important thing is to figure out, well, how can I get people who I'm looking up to actually care about me and want to invest in me? So perform well and make yourself vulnerable. I'll tell you a quick story. The longer version is in my book, but when I first met Michelle Robinson, it'll be 30 years next year ago, before she was even married to Barack Obama, they were engaged. I still remember interviewing her for a job she was considering in City Hall. And I remember how she looked. I remember her confidence. I remember her looking me in the face and shaking my hand. But what I remember most is that she said to me, because I said, "Well, why are you thinking of leaving a law firm and joining the public sector?" Even though I had done the exact same thing, I was curious about her motivation. And she said, "My dad and my best friend died within the last year." And she teared up and she said, "It was a wake-up call. I wasn't expecting either of those deaths. And I realized how short and precious life is. And I needed to make sure I was making the best of mine." So here it is nearly 30 years later. And I remember how she made me feel. And I think sometimes we're so busy trying to prove that we are competent and smart and look at my credentials. She never mentioned Princeton undergrad, Harvard law. She told me who she was. And so I say, if you're looking for a mentor, look around wherever you're working or not working. Some of my best mentors have been friends of mine who are the people who are my sounding board. The person who got me to leave the law firm was a lawyer at another firm who was my friend. And he felt sorry for me because I was so darn miserable. And he took me out to lunch. Well, if we didn't have that personal relationship, he wouldn't have done that, right? So take the time to build those personal relationships. And it's hard and it's time consuming, but and you have to be vulnerable. So you might ask somebody who's senior to you when we all get back to normal, "Hey, want to go and grab a bite after work?" and pick their brain for advice long before you say, will you be my mentor? Because if it happens well, you slip into the relationship without even needing the label.
I appreciate that. I want to thank Marie for that question. And while we wait for the next question, I want to ask you about our current Attorney General and whether or not you think a resignation is appropriate for him.
Well, I will tell you, makes me cough just thinking about it. Stunning to me that an Attorney General would consider dropping charges against somebody who confessed to a crime knowingly. And what are the grounds for that? It doesn't make any sense. And the rule of law is what the Attorney General is there to protect. He is the people's lawyer. He's not the president's lawyer or the administration's lawyer. He is in an independent position designed to look out for the people. And so if it's okay to lie to the FBI, and it's okay to then confess and plead guilty, and then suddenly you're off the hook, well, Katie bar the door, as my grandmother used to say. What's off limits now?
That's right.
And so it's deeply and profoundly troubling to me. And I think that we have to kind of do some gut check about, if we continue down this path, then what separates us from many of the countries that we've been so critical of? How do we hold ourselves up as the model example of a democracy when we have an Attorney General behaving so badly?
Thank you. With that, we'll pivot to Ellen's question. What steps can we take to return ourselves to a civil society?
Well, I say, let's not go back. Let's go forward. Let's take what we've learned from this current climate, and let's say, how do we build a better America? Not one where we're making it something again, but one where it's better than it was. I mean, we should be on this constant road of progression. And I think that the answer rests with each of us. Like, are we being decent and kind to ourselves and to each other? Are we, as I walk around New York, the only place I go really, other than walking outside, is I go to the grocery store. I always say thank you to the people working in the grocery store. I don't know them. They're strangers to me. Or if I pass a police officer on the way, thank you. I mean, where is the decency that we have within all of us? And I worry, frankly, that with masks, people are kind of, we walk like away from each other on the sidewalk, and just because you have on the mask doesn't mean you can't say good morning. And so I think these are small little things. I'm using those examples by intention, because I think it's those small little things that bubble up to turn into a better, healthier, more empathetic, and more humane culture. And I think we can't wait for somebody else to take the lead on that. I think we all have to do it. We all have to act and do what you can do. And if it's just saying thank you, or here in New York at 7:00 where everybody cheers the healthcare workers, you feel like you're in this together. You feel like you're doing something together. And then we have to demand it of our elected officials, because again, they're the role models. And if they're not exhibiting the kind of behavior that we think is worthy of our children looking up to them, then we should change them. And not shun. I mean, one of my worries, frankly, is that we're shunning institutions in general, higher education, religion, government, business. If we don't like it, let's get in there and make it better. Let's not just shun it, particularly because, as we've been discussing, Brandy, government impacts our daily lives. It can be the difference between life and death if it's done well versus done poorly. And so why wouldn't we get in there and fight for ourselves by holding those officials accountable and reinforcing that you want to support candidates who are decent to their core?
That reflect your values. Thank you.
Reflect your values.
I also want to ask you, before we go into the next question from the audience, about your time with Vice President Joe Biden. You worked very closely. So tell us about Joe and what you want the audience today to know about Joe moving forward.
I think Joe Biden is uniquely prepared to lead our country at this very moment. Not only does he have an extraordinary track record from his leadership roles in the Senate, He was vice president with a very special relationship with the president for 8 years. And by that I mean, having been there all 8 years myself, I can tell you there wasn't a major decision President Obama made without consulting Vice President Biden. Vice President Biden could weigh in on every single issue. He was given responsibilities for big pieces of business like the Recovery Act that was executed flawlessly and contributed mightily to improving our economy in the recession of 2008 and 2009. But there were just, we would have these senior staff meetings to debate policy. He came to all of them. He was right there with President Obama. And I think having experienced those 8 years and having learned as much as he had, he also saw the inequities and the injustices around our country and cares fervently, as he has since he was a young person, about closing those gaps, about making it a more level playing field, about looking out for the person who feels like government has run roughshod over them. Because those were the experiences that he had as a young person that shaped him to go into politics in the first place, to shape him to go into service. And then the final thing I'll say about Vice President Biden is that he has had to face more professional and personal adversity than most people would have to do. And his ability to do it with strength, with character, with humility, with grace, is what I think is important to have in a leader as well. I mean, one story I will always treasure about him, given how busy we all are, one day I was returned to the White House, having been home from my father's death. And there's no nice way of saying that. My dad died, and I went home when he was really ill and stayed for a while. And when I came back, the day I got back, I got a phone call from the vice president's assistant, and she said, "Just want to give you a heads up, Vice President is on his way to your office." And I'm like, "My office? I'll come to him." And she says, no, he's on his way to you. And he came in and he sat down with me and he looked me right in the face and he said, "I promise you, one day your tears of sorrow will turn into smiles of joy when you think about your dad." And he was right. And it took a long time, but I held that comment in the back of my mind. And when I did start to smile, when I think of him, it's hard to say now without crying, but I just really appreciate that he did that for me. And he could have just seen me at the next meeting and said, Val, I'm so sorry.
But the decent.
He is a decent person. He does those things and he doesn't do it. It's not a shtick. It's totally authentic. I stood with him with the families from the Pulse nightclub shooting. And I was standing between he and President Obama so I could hear what they were both saying to the survivors and also to the family members of those who didn't survive. And he gave each person like his all because he wanted to make a difference in their lives. And so I think right now, I don't know about you, Brandy, but I am hungry for that kind of leadership, that kind of empathy, that person who genuinely cares and who also, by the way, has an experience and a track record uniquely preparing him for this moment in time. So I'm going to be out there doing everything I can for Vice President Biden, and I hope everybody here will be too. And, I hear a lot, again, particularly from young people, well, if they don't agree with me on 100%, I'm not going to vote for them. Well, you know what? You're not going to agree with your life partner 100%. You're not going to agree with your business partner 100%.
Yeah.
And as Vice President Biden always says, do not compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the alternative. And let me tell you something. You will sleep better at night knowing that Vice President Biden is making the decisions that affect your life.
Well, thank you. This has been really rich. Thank you, Valerie.
You are so welcome. I enjoyed it. I wish I could be there with you in person, give you a hug at the end of our chat, but I'll send you a virtual one. And thank everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate you. And thanks for the questions. They were good questions too.
Thank you. So we have a link below to your book so folks can get the latest. And we're at the end of our show today. So I want to thank everyone for carving out time to be with us and to share your thoughts and your questions. Please, please, please continue to stay tuned for more exciting events from the Raven Group. And this will live on our YouTube channel. Thank you all. Be safe, be well, take care.
Thank you, Brandy.